Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zahn. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. You're about to listen to a storytelling FAQ sprint episode with Michelle Griffin. For those of you who might not be familiar with Michelle, she coaches on authority-focused personal branding to help professionals step out and be seen as leaders in their space. Since this is an FAQ sprint, Michelle will be answering a question on branding, and I'll be answering a question on storytelling. Let's dive in. Michelle, what platforms are best for building our personal brands?
Well, Matt, I'm so glad you asked because, not every platform is conducive. Because when you think about this, it's about where your audience is. I know we've all heard the cliche thing. And it's also where you're really good at putting, content out there. I'm a firm believer in we start very narrow and one platform get really good. But let's back a little bit. First, where is your audience? Where you and I both live and do our best content and thought leadership is LinkedIn. Now, of course, I'm going to say that, I wrote the LinkedIn branding book, had the LinkedIn branding show podcast as well. In the B2B space, in the professional world, LinkedIn is, you can even think of it as a thought leadership platform, right? It's not even that much of a social media platform, but it is so important there. Obviously, you're going to make sure your audience is there and that you're really good at wanting to be there. But here's the thing about LinkedIn. There's so many avenues and channels and how to get your thought leadership out and build that personal brand. You can do audio events. You can do audio clips. You can do videos. There's a new video feed. You can do articles and newsletters and posts. You can even do commenting. So there's so many different channels on LinkedIn, and it's constantly evolving, and it's constantly catering to the B2B business professional. Not only that, LinkedIn is given a high authority in search engines. So when you Google someone on LinkedIn, their LinkedIn profile and company page come up very, very high. So you see that tremendously having a lot of effects when you do searches for articles and newsletters, which I'm really, really big on right now, is, doing a lot of thought leadership articles and newsletters. So I'm going to say hands down, because of all the benefits that I just mentioned, I believe LinkedIn is the best place for building your thought leadership, authority-focused personal brand, Matt. But
and that's how we met.
That's how we met. Like, we met on LinkedIn about almost 4 years ago, and here we are. So not only that, you're going to be building your personal brand, you're going to be making important business, professional connections and partnerships. And so there's more than just about building your brand. You're going to snowball it with the opportunities, not to mention the media there. Thank you for reminding me that the media are there, especially after the sort of demise of Twitter, X. There's a lot more media showing up there, looking for experts to quote, to mention in articles, not to mention to be invited to podcasts, on summits, industry speaking. It's just, I call it your launching pad. LinkedIn is your launching pad. You want to be there, and that profile should definitely be your personal brand website that is always being updated. So you can tell I'm super excited about LinkedIn being the go-to place to build that personal brand map. So yeah, I could go on, but we won't, because I know when you go on, you can do something too frequently. And that reminds me, Matt, storytelling is huge. Like, that's always what I'm trying to learn from you. But I have a question, Matt. Can you tell a story too much? I mean, what's too frequent in storytelling?
I love the question. So let's hit it from multiple angles. So let's talk about sales, marketing, internal communication, and onboarding. So I'll try to hit these four branches that you're going to want to really zone in on your storytelling for sure, your strategic storytelling. So when it comes to sales, There are parts of the sales process that you can share a story again and again and again and again. So everyone listening, I want you to imagine your sales reps, they're on the phone, they're talking to prospects. Well, because they're new prospects, because they're different people, if there are specific stories that tend to work, meaning your sales reps share the story and the likelihood that the sale closes goes up, those would be your quote unquote hit stories. Just like there's hit songs, these would be your company's hit stories. So they can share those again and again and again because they're different people. When it comes to marketing, so to tie back to the LinkedIn piece that you had mentioned, there's different ways of looking at this depending on the organization. There are some individuals that every 6 months, they might share the same story, every 3 months, it could be every year. It really depends on the individual that's running the marketing for the organization. So personally, I like to run an annual play where there's a story that I'm sharing once a year, and I put them in different slots in that year. So I want you to imagine a calendar, and on that calendar, there would be obviously specific days when it comes to, let's say, birthdays. So birthdays of significant team players in your organization, or birthdays of significant clients that you might have, right? So those would be significant days. There could be holidays too, that maybe different stories transpired on those holidays. That would be a great time to share the same story. You might tweak it a little bit from year to year, but because you've already put the story in the world, you already see that it gets results. I wouldn't recreate the wheel regarding that story. If you're already getting results on the story, you can continue to get residual results based on that story. So yes, you could share that again and again, but you really need to look at the timing and intentionality of that. When it comes to internal communication, you want to be very mindful of not sharing the same story too much. This is one of the cases where you need to be very mindful of the stories you're sharing because you're sharing this to your team. So an individual that gets up at a staff meeting and they're presenting to their team, well, clearly you're not going to want to share the same story again and again with your team. They're going to roll their eyes. They're going to be looking for their watch to try to figure out, when is this going to be over? I've heard this a million times. I don't want to hear it again, which is the last thing you want your audience to think. So this is more of a rotating story bank, so to speak. And I know, Michelle, you and I have talked extensively regarding story banks. But when it comes to an internal communication story bank, so a story bank you're setting up for your staff meetings, this is going to be rotating. So this is something that you can track on your phone through a certain application or some type of note-taking app where you're putting bullet points in there as stories come into your life, where you can share the story at your staff meeting the following week, right? But you want to be mindful. And then the story would be taking out, you'd have a rotating story bank regarding that. And then the onboarding piece, the fourth and final point, the onboarding piece. A lot of companies are terrible when it comes to onboarding. They're just not getting new team members set up for success when it comes to sharing the specific stories that they need to hear to understand what the culture is, the pulse of the organization. One of the best ways that you can do this is you tie core values to specific stories. So instead of saying we're an organization of integrity, which means nothing, because there's a textbook definition of integrity, but it means nothing unless there's a story that backs what that means. You would actually take the core value and you would attach a story to it. Those would be the stories that are shared at these onboarding meetings that you're having for new team members. And clearly, again, they would be the same stories because there's new team members going through those meetings. So again, it really depends on the avenues that you're sharing the stories, like what you're doing. But there's times that we're sharing the same story again and again, and then there's times where we are not.
Well, that makes a ton of sense. Timing is everything, and so is context. So thank you so much for setting that straight, Matt. It makes a ton of sense. I understand that so much better now.
You just listened to the latest FAQ Sprint episode with Michelle Griffin. If you have a question for Michelle or me, please email me at matt@mattzahn.com with the subject line FAQ episode.